Awesome. So thank you, everybody, for welcoming me to talk with you all. Hopefully, at the end of this session, you say, you know, a lot of what we talked about was common sense, and also I'd like more detail. So the last slide here has a lot of references. Today, as the title shows, this is about holistic business results. So we're not diving deep. I'm happy to get deeper in our Q&A at the end, but we're going to talk about how some great processes fit together and can be leveraged from a lean and agile perspective to improve holistic business results. And so, you know, sometimes we can think, well, that's, you know, how does that impact me? I always try to think of my work as my own business as I work for a company, right? And treat it like I own it. And the better we perform within an organization, the better the organization's going to perform, and the more money is available, truthfully, for our pay. I've been in growing organizations and I've been in shrinking organizations, and it's a lot more fun to be in a thriving, growing organization. So next slide, please. So this is coming up. You know, this intro is really about things that you know, but I want to kind of focus we work to provide customer value, the paying customers, regardless of what company or even government workers' salaries. So we all have customers, and that customer value that we provide as an organization comes back and in terms often of dollars for organizational value that helps us have great tools and support and practices and our salaries. You know, as engineers and other workers. So next slide, please.
Hey, Fred, your audio is a little bit wonky. So I don't know if if the mic's moving but I'll get to the next slide.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. All right, so maximizing the flow of value. It's great to talk with engineers. I do, you know, my background's in engineering, hardware, software, and I do a lot of work with people in all parts of the business. And I always find it much easier to talk with people that have an engineering background, a systems thinking type of background. So glad to be here with you all. From a systems perspective, often when we use the word system, we think about IT systems, software systems, and sometimes we think about hardware, software systems. Here I'm thinking about the whole organization as a system of people, process, technology, and other assets. So if we think about everything that needs to happen in this big interconnected system, then we can do a much better job of ensuring that every part of that system is optimized. Some of those parts are software related and some parts are others. So aligning the system alignment bullet here, aligning all the parts of the system to work optimally together, again, beyond the software, but definitely including the software, is a key part of what we're talking about here. And then the next, we'll touch on a few topics of lean, including value streams. And I know everybody has a different people I talk to often have a different perspective of what is lean. And lean is a predecessor to Agile. And I think everybody here has at least a decent understanding of Agile practices and principles. Lean preceded Agile. Scrum leverage, when Sutherland and Schwaber were creating Scrum, they were leveraging a lot of the information from lean thinking, and we'll discuss a little bit about that background quickly. But if we go back to the lean principles, they can help describe why we're doing some of the Agile practices. In other words, lean is all about the flow of value to the customer. And Scrum, for example, if we're planning in 2-week sprints, we do sprint planning, daily stand-ups, and at the end of a 2-week sprint, if not sooner, we should have potentially releasable code that's providing value to our customers. The fundamental thinking of that flow of value early and often comes from lean. So we'll briefly touch on value streams there. Problem solving. I have a slide that has a problem solving tool, but more importantly, a little bit about mindset and innovation related to problem solving, and some very extensive practical studies on problem solving, and organizational strategy and execution. If we work for an organization, the first company I worked with out of college, I remember we had 900,000 people, over 900,000 people. So if the strategy changes at the top, it can take years for that to trickle through the organization, and business moves much faster than that. So companies that thrive and companies that we want to work for and help to thrive need to be much more agile than that. So connecting changes and strategies all the way down to me, if I'm writing code today, all the way down to what I'm doing, and having that alignment is part of what we'll talk about there. And there are a few different best practices that we'll touch on. And then continuous ruthless improvement. I really like the word ruthless. That stuck in my head from a president of a company I worked with years ago. And when we're talking about solving problems and making improvements, continuous improvement it's a nice word. It describes we want to continuously improve, but really being relentless and ruthless about it is key to all this, because it's hard work. It's hard work. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple slides on proven results. So you could go to the next slide. So this, I was just curious on what Copilot would come up with if I asked it to show a trend from the 70s up to now of Toyota's performance. And the reason I picked Toyota is because they're really the roots of lean thinking. So, what if you see at the far left, the Toyota line that goes up for decades, as that was happening, a lot of people's attention was captured on what are they doing that we're not doing. And in short, how did lean thinking evolve? There was a huge study done from MIT that resulted in the book The Machine That Changed the World, and James Womack and Daniel Jones were in the middle, kind of leading that study with some others, and they wrote the book, and then they followed up with writing the book Lean Thinking, and there's lean.org. There's continual amount of additional great value in that space. The company that I worked for at the time when I was in the auto industry, we hired James Womack to help us progress. And prior to that, we were actually mentioned in the book as one of the few U.S. companies or companies in the world, really, other than Toyota, that was actually applying these lean principles successfully. So the reason I like to show this is that it shows that the principles and practices that we'll touch on and the many references on the last slide here have proven results, right? You can see Toyota over the decades, 900% improvement, and three other, big global automotive companies. If we average their annual, so this is the number of vehicles sold per year. If we average their growth, it actually goes down a little bit over the same time period that Toyota, multiplied their annual sales of units 9 times. So next slide, please. And so that's Toyota. Personally, when I was the global lean champion in the auto industry, a company of, at the time, 167,000 people, so a large organization, I was the global lean champion for new product development. So what we were really focused on was taking the lean thinking that really had roots in manufacturing and applying that to new product development, hardware, software, components for vehicles, and then expanding beyond that into other automotive units. And as we were doing that, and I was working with people from around the world, our experts. I was coordinating it and leading this effort to develop our new processes for product development, but really the expertise of all the details that we could do to improve came from a large group of people from around the world, and we consolidated, proved them one at a time incrementally, and made significant improvements over 4 years. So we had 8 standard KPIs that we had measured before we started this journey. And of those 8 standard KPIs that we measured our programs by, we had a 300% improvement over 4 years. So those are just a couple examples of how some of the things that follow can be applied and make real business improvements. So next slide, please. So now we'll get into some of the categories, and all of these categories we could spend a year talking about: systems engineering, systems thinking. We're just going to touch on them and a little bit about how they fit together. So a couple big areas around systems engineering, systems thinking. One is think holistically of the entire system and optimize the whole system, not any individual part. So in other words, related to software, we should be thinking about the entire product or the whole company, and ensuring that the entire value stream or the entire process or the entire architecture kind of fits together in an optimal way, as opposed to optimizing one part that we may happen to work on. And that often, if we're just focused on optimizing one part, most of the time that has a negative impact on the entire system. So at the end of the flow of work, the end of the value stream, there there's an impact. Maybe it's a higher cost because we optimized our part, but it sub-optimized some other parts. So in total for the company, the cost is higher. So optimizing the system, and you all probably know that. The other part that I'm sure you've experienced a lot is from a systems thinking perspective, the major pain points, the major problems and inefficiencies are often at the interfaces. So the interfaces between systems. And so again, with a holistic perspective, we can optimize the interfaces and optimize the entire system. And again, at the bottom here, when I'm talking about systems, people, process, technology, other assets, including money. Things don't happen without financial resources and many other knowledge of people, etc. So it's not easy to optimize that whole system. But from an agile perspective, as many of you know, agile practices have always strongly pushed cross-functional teams involving the business, involving operational people, product owners to bring all that to a focus, product managers at a higher level to bring, the holistic system to a clear focus, so that every day the engineers, we can work on what's most important for us today that's going to provide the most value in small pieces that can be delivered early and often. So system thinking is behind a lot of what's to follow. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm sure some of you have seen over the years different diagrams that show arrows and going in different directions, or arrows aligned. Being kind of a geek, I did some vector analysis and did the math on the arrows that are not all aligned on the bottom and the arrows that are aligned. So let's say that we have 10 teams working together, or 10 people working together, but let's say 10 teams. And each team, if they're fully aligned, they're providing a unit of output. And if that output is fully aligned with the goals, like on the top line,
Fred, I think we lost Fred.
then we've progressed to 10 units. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you just repeat it? We lost you just about 10 seconds.
Okay. Okay. So the top line is, if all the work, it's odd because I'm sitting right beside a window to try to get the best signal. So I apologize for that. But anyway, the top line shows all the work perfectly aligned to the North Star. And in that example, if we do 10 units of work and get 10 units of full value directly aligned with our organizational strategy, then our 10 teams can be very effective in helping us achieve the organizational strategy. On the bottom, if maybe the communication's not great, or the accountability is not great, or people get interrupted a lot, pulled off into other areas, and some of the work of teams isn't fully aligned with the North Star or the organizational strategies and objectives, then in this example, we'd only get about 8.2 per 8.2 of those potential 10 units of value, so about 82%. So we're losing about, roughly 20% of our productivity just by not being aligned. Maybe people are doing great work individually. If we have 10 teams, 10 people per team, 100 people, maybe each individual is doing awesome work, but if that work's not optimally aligned with the strategy, the whole organization is a lot less competitive, which, back to our first comments, lessens the organizational performance and competitiveness, which, sometimes takes a hit on our careers as well. Okay, next slide, please. Great. So this is a very much oversimplified value stream map. If anybody's done value stream mapping, and there's some words off the screen there at the bottom that describe that and some of the other things. So I don't want to give the perspective that this is a full value stream map, but it's with the time that we have, it gives us something to work with at a high level. So if we're a company that provides hardware, software, we start out by identifying there's some customer need, right? We start out by identifying that need, maybe turning it into some requirements as we win contracts. And then we develop the hardware, software, integrate them. Ideally, we'd be integrating them continuously together, do verification, validation, testing, etc., build and ship, and then collect our revenue. And ideally, it'd be profitable revenue, and we can continue to sell products while we're improving them, forever. So this is a cyclical effort. So I always encourage our teams to understand where we fit into the entire value stream and how each person's work is contributing to the value that the customer is receiving. So these are a lot of the key concepts that aren't always emphasized in agile practices, but they're in there. They're built in, and the practices enable us. They position us to better do these types of things. So super important to understand the value stream. Next slide, please. So here, let's say we understood the value stream, we defined it, and all of a sudden, or maybe continuously, there's competitive pressure. And we need to increase the value that we're delivering and reduce our cost. And at this level, this is at the entire organizational level, not a feature level yet, or user story. This is at the organizational level. So if we need an organizational strategy or objective to to address this competitive pressure so that we can continue to thrive as a business, let's, in this example, say that the leadership of the organization simplified our job into two things. One is increase the value we deliver and reduce the cost. So this is a hardware software product. Let's say it's the computer in an autonomous vehicle. So as we're developing the next features and refining the software, we're trying to make it lower cost, which maybe results in reducing some of the hardware and doing some more things with software, etc., and increase the value. So identify what value, the typical product development work, what value does it provide, and give more of that. And then we'll look at how that can be organized in some of the lean approaches next. So next slide, please. Okay. So first, we have basically two problems to solve. One is improving value, and one is reducing cost. And this information on this slide, of all the things that I've really tried to focus on, this has bubbled up to the one of the items in the front of my mind often as we're doing this kind of work, is this thought of automatic processing and conscious processing, or sometimes it's called system one or system two. Um, Daniel Kahneman wrote a great book. It's really long, but it's a great book on called Thinking Fast and Slow. So the automatic processing here, that's how we get through our day. If we had to think through every single thing that we do, we would never get through the day. So when I wake up in the morning, get ready for work, go out the door, I don't think about the doorknob and I need to turn it clockwise 90 degrees, right? It just happens. It's automatic processing. This comes of, the history of humans, and survival of the fittest. To survive in the wild, if we think through everything in detail while we're being attacked, for example, we just wouldn't survive as a species. So this automatic processing is very necessary. But what it is, it's built on habits, and habits are built from the past. So the automatic processing that people tend to do is giving us more of the same. It's not innovative. It's enabling us to do the routine things very fast. Then there's conscious processing, and to get new things, to innovate and solve these problems better than anybody else in the world. So the innovation here is, providing more value to our customers and less at less cost. So with that, if we're going to really innovate in ways nobody else has done before, the conscious processing is very important. And the next two bullets, clearly defining the problem, including the gap. Where are we today with our cost? And specifically, what is our target to lower our cost to? But defining that gap helps us get into the conscious processing and following a structured problem solving process. So there's a great article in the MIT Sloan Management Review, the most underrated skill in management, that gets into some of this. So I highly recommend that. I was in like a continuing ed executive education series over a few years, and I took a couple classes with Reppening and Kiefer, and they're really a lot of the work MIT does is with industry. So Kiefer's from Harley Davidson, Reppening's a professor, and they work together on these things. So great work. I'd highly recommend the article. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some approaches to structured problem solving that can get us out of that automatic thinking and get us into more innovative, conscious thinking. So the scientific method, right? Create a hypothesis and see if we can run experiments to disprove the hypothesis or give us high confidence it's true. A3, we'll look at it in a couple minutes. We're getting ready to wrap up here shortly. Six Sigma, design thinking. Gemba is a Japanese word for going to the source directly. So if we're trying to improve the value of a product for a customer, we should be talking with the customer. We need to go to the source. Root cause analysis. So many other practices here. the key point is we need our brains need some structured problem solving process to get us into that innovative mode. Next slide, please. So is this coming up? Real quickly, this is like, we'll look at the vertical part in a minute, but we want to think as we're optimizing things from a systems engineering perspective, system being, again, people, process, technology, and other assets, how things connect at higher levels, how our work connects at higher levels, and cross-functional work and value stream work. So 3 focuses to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, and one tool, we don't have time to go through all the tools, but this is a really good tool. A3 is just a paper size in Europe. I know some of you probably are familiar. Toyota uses these one-page documents for problem solving, and I won't walk through all the fields here, but the intent is very similar to Scrum. And again, a lot of these different principles and practices and frameworks have the same ideas and the same basic principles that are applied in slightly different ways. Here, you could kind of relate this to a sprint and Scrum, where this would be defining what we're going to do in sprint planning, and we do work and say at the end of 2 weeks, we'd review that work in the bottom right and say, how'd it go? Have we added some value? What did we learn, and what do we want to do next? So there's some articles on the last slide here that talk more about A3 problem solving. Next slide, please. So a few listed organizational strategy execution frameworks are here. Hoshin Kanri fits very well with the A3 lean portfolio management. SAFE, the Scaled Agile framework, has adopted that. OKRs. These are 3 of the many frameworks to execute strategy for the whole company. And the details in all 3 are very similar, so there's a lot of overlap there. I'd encourage you to dig into those deeper. I'm here for questions. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next one with the white boxes. So thank you. If we assume that we have, this is an example kind of pulling this together. We assume that we want to have higher levels of performance and lower cost, lower price, then we need to increase the performance on the left side. We break that down into 2. We break that one strategic objective into 2 areas, left and right. So we want to say increase the safety performance, for example, could be another, we could call it a level 2 objective. On the right, reduce shipping costs, that could be a level 2. And then we could break those down into even more detail, level 3 objectives. And each one of these boxes could have an A3 to solve the problem or one of the other structured ways. Next slide, please. Okay, so once we have the corporate objectives, we break them down and we get to the team level or the team of teams level. Here are some frameworks that I'm sure you're familiar with. Scrum, Kanban. I put Scaling Agile because SAFE, the Scaled Agile framework, is just one of the Scaling Agile approaches. But all good approaches, depending on largely the people and their impressions, but we want some lean and agile way to manage the work once we've broke it down. Some key characteristics that are good to have: iterative and delivering value very early and often, empirical, like going to the source and actually seeing things working and testing things, aligned with the scientific method, plan, do, check, act, etc. Next slide, please. And then here coming up is plan, do, check, act, continuous improvement, ruthless improvement. This is central to scaled agile, lean approaches, Scrum, Kanban done well, OKRs done well, Hoshin Kanri, many things. So plan, do, check, act is one of the core one of the core approaches that is built into agile and lean activities every day. And then the last slide is just kind of a reminder to say, okay, if we do these types of things, everything that we've talked about is our core parts of how Toyota runs their business, and it's done very well for them. And the competitors, if they had not adopted similar practices, then they would be out of business if they weren't, striving to be lean like Toyota is. They're just, often not as refined and as disciplined as Toyota has been consistently for decades. So on the last slide here, thinking through that, the takeaways, I would say, what performance do you strive to achieve for yourself, for your teams and department, your product, and in your company, and think about that value delivered from that to the final customer and how that makes its way back to you. And have that holistic systems thinking, just like we would have for a software system, but expand that to the whole company: people, process, technologies, and other assets. And then the following slide has a lot of great articles. I'd suggest, pick one that you're interested in the most. Don't be overwhelmed by a long list. Pick one and progress from there. But a lot more details in everything that we discussed are in these areas. So that's all. I can stay on. I know you have a little bit of wrap up for this meeting at the end. I can stay on for a few questions now, and potentially after the ending agenda items, I could stay on if needed.
We certainly have time for questions, and so you can feel free to unmute or raise your hand or put your question in the chat. So while we're waiting for people to get their thoughts together, Fred, don't they still use lean in manufacturing? Isn't that still very common?
For high performing organizations, absolutely. And even in a lot like hospitals, for example, non-manufacturing companies. And as anything, so lean, Toyota was executing a lot of these practices decades ago, but they keep getting better. Like anything, the practices continue to be refined. The tools we can use and technologies continue to be refined.
Other questions, folks?
Yeah, Fred, this is Jeff Schwab. I have a question. I typed it in the chat, but I was curious when you said earlier 300% improvement in a number of projects, organizations. I don't remember the exact reference you made, but how do you measure, or what does that mean? What are the measures or the metrics that convey that achievement of 300%?
That was back on slide 6, by the way, Julia.
Mm-hmm. Great question. I felt lucky that we had already implemented our 8 standard KPIs prior, about a year to a couple years before we started this big transformation. And the transformation was to apply the lean practices that we had refined for our manufacturing, pull those into the engineering group and applying them to our new product development. And the metrics included financial metrics, timing metrics on time for specific key milestones, not throughout the early stages of development, but once we started getting ready to put parts in cars for testing and for production, and customer satisfaction and quality metrics. So financial, quality, and timing metrics for the most part. So we had 8 of those, and we had a history of, what our performance was. And I tracked those as we were going through these years. And after 4 years, I took, all of our data from it was over 500 programs globally that were implementing these improved lean and agile practices applied to product development. And we had a metric that we called flawless launch. So a flawless launch had to hit a certain level in all of these metrics. And if it was a flawless launch, then we counted that as a good, and if it wasn't, we counted them as a bad. So the 300% was a 300% improvement in flawless launches, which was a summary of the 8 KPIs.
Did you have any follow-up, Jeff, or that answered?
So yeah, I was thinking in your response, you were talking about manufacturing, but then you did bring up development. Sounded like development kind of projects. Those are the ones I'd be most interested in knowing what 300% means. Is it, for instance, estimating how big something will be or how long it'll take to deliver versus how long it actually took? Is it some kind of quality metrics, something else? I'm just curious.
Yes, and it'll probably help. I didn't describe the product. So these are electrical, electronic, hardware, software parts for cars. And we didn't dictate the timing when they're ready to build the cars. The parts need to be there. The software needs to work. The hardware needs to be ready. They're huge financial impacts, many millions of dollars of negative impacts if we're not there on time. So from a timing perspective, we measured, one was run at rate on time. So we have to be able to produce a number of parts equal to or above the cadence, the number per week that we'll have when we're in full production, to prove that we have the capacity to make those. PPAP is the production parts approval process that had to pass and be on time. And a variety of other financial, are we profitable, is our cost where it needs to be? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Fred, there's a couple questions that are there, and I think they're kind of highly interrelated. So one of them's from Mary, and she mentioned that she's coming from a project management environment, and she's learned about many of the methods that you've mentioned, including Agile from software kind of land, lean from management, Six Sigma from healthcare kind of setting. And so her observation is that more and more companies seem to be adopting these methods. Is it because they really work across industries, or are there other forces at work? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I feel lucky, maybe because I'm not maybe, I've been doing this for 4 decades. So I've kind of seen this journey of what 2 decades ago, or 2001 was coined as Agile. Before that, Scrum existed since about 1993, but was not super well known.
Right.
But what I hear a lot of now is agile practices can apply to other parts of the business, not just software. But in reality, the practices, the principles, and the core practices behind them existed before agile. So in other words, a lot of these lean practices that Toyota and grocery stores and other manufacturers and companies refined over the decades, those started to grow in popularity. A lot of the core practices started to grow in popularity and be packaged into frameworks like Scrum and Scaled Agile framework and DSDM and others, Kanban for software development, and others. And I think the reason that, if we just pick one to answer the question, why is it adopted? If we just pick Scrum, I think there are two reasons that Scrum has been very popular. One is it's simple. If it was overly complicated, then the adoption is much harder. And the second is it works and aligned with it working, it's visible that it works. So in the past, I've worked on, I remember joining a company that when I got there, they were already 3 years into product development and were probably, they were thinking the year and a half away from launching. So 4.5 years to launch versus getting something of value every 2 weeks that's highly visible and demonstrated, not on a Gantt chart, but actually seeing the product. So two things, Scrum works, it shows improvements that are visible, and it's pretty straightforward to get started with. Some people will say it's easy to learn, but really hard to master, and I go along with that. We can always get better at Scrum, but it's really simple to start.
And that actually led right into the follow-on related question that I was going to ask about. Many of us are used to thinking in terms of software teams and Scrum and those kinds of agile practices, and maybe more broadly, how does all this apply to other activities with the business outside of software? And I think you kind of touched on that because this is all sort of sourced from different industries. So